Today we're going to take a little break from chasing after the individual Democrat leaders, governors, and the odd things that they do and the strange way that they continue to stay in power, or the fact that some of them are getting paid more money during the midst of a pandemic economic downfall. And instead, we're going to focus on the Electoral College. And the reason for this is simple. Right now, with all that's happening in our election, all the impropriety, potential fraud, allegations of inappropriate actions, allegations of non-residential voting, just illegitimate voting. With these things happening and these allegations flying back and forth, it has caused some to start to question the validity of the Electoral College. Now, this is nothing new. People have questioned it for a little bit. It always seems to be liberals, sadly. Not to point the finger, but that just happens to be the case. So right now, in the Washington Post, there's an article that was written on November 15th of 2020 by the editorial board of the Washington Post. And it goes on to say, Mr. Thyson's point was that Mr. Trump's near miss makes him a viable candidate in 2024. We draw a different lesson. It is alarming that a candidate came so close to winning while polling more than 5 million fewer votes than his opponent nationwide. The Electoral College, whatever virtues it may have had for the Founding Fathers, is no longer tenable for American democracy. We write this with full awareness of the challenges of adopting a new system, with respect for many of the people who continue to argue against a switch, and with awareness that any change may have unintended consequences. Right now, our presidential elections are conducted by 51 separate authorities, each with its own rules on registration, mail-in balloting, and more. Each state counts its own ballots, and each decides when recounts are needed. All of that would have to change if the president were chosen based on a national vote count. Additionally, Electoral College math induces candidates to pay attention to voters in small states who might otherwise be ignored. How is that a bad thing? They literally just said, the Washington Post editorial board literally just expressed the idea in their own article arguing against the Electoral College, that the Electoral College gives a voice to the smaller states. Otherwise, they would be beholden to the wills of places like California, places like New York. And I'm sorry, but I don't want to live like people in California. I don't want to live like people in New York. I like the small town feel, the minimal taxes that we have, and having a say in how elections are completed and what candidate gets into office. Without the Electoral College, smaller states will have no voice. They already have a minimal voice. It has been marginalized by the system as it stands right now. And that's because even though we have the Electoral College, states like California and New York and the larger states have more electorates. So those states do have a bigger voice. It's not something that we need to change, because that would completely eliminate the voice and the opinion and essentially the rights of the smaller states. California has many electoral votes. Small states like New Hampshire have 4. They're not going to change an election, but at least they stand a chance with the combined power of the many smaller states across the country that seem to vote in opposition of the popular vote. But it's not just the Electoral College and the additional electorates that give these larger states a bigger voice. They hold more power in government when you look at the number of representatives that the larger states have. Go do a quick Google search and look at the number of representatives in the House for the state of California. It's a lot more than the smaller states. So they not only have a bigger voice in terms of the election because of their number of electorates, but they have a bigger voice in legislation. So the federal laws and regulations that get passed that impact everyone across the country are being decided to some extent by the larger states already. And a popular vote is nothing new. We do it anyway. For whatever reason, it's really not an important vote. It helps people, I guess, to see how many votes one gets versus another. And so people can say, look, more people like my guy, or more people like my guy, whatever. But as it is right now, we go to the electorates and they make the final decision, and so be it. But each individual state operates on a popular vote, which means that in an individual state, larger cities determine what the outcome is for the entire state, for the most part. So if you live in New York, and let's say you live in smaller outliers of New York and you're nowhere near New York City, you probably don't like the way this current system is for using the popular vote in your state, because your district has no power in the decision making of the state. None whatsoever. Because there's no way that a small county outside of the New York City area is going to overwhelm the voice of the district, which also has New York City. A better way to do this, in my opinion, would be to assign a number of votes to each district as a percentage of the population, and then from that, you would assign the victory by those votes. You would tally up the districts, not the total numbers, and then pile them into one stack, but instead say, okay, counties A, B, and C all voted for candidate X, but county D, which is a much bigger county, voted for candidate Y. Well, we have 3 counties voting for candidate X. So that is the candidate that this state is going to sponsor. I think that would be a better way to do it, because I believe in giving voice to the smaller counties, giving some voice. You know, at the end of the day, I'm not saying to assign each district the exact same number of votes, because that would be asinine. Just like how California has more representatives in government, big cities in an individual state under this system that I'm hypothesizing would be assigned a larger number of representatives as well. So they'd still hold a larger voice, but it may be less. It may be less than required for them to overwhelm the entire state and essentially force the city's will on the entire state. And that could change this entire election process. But rather than trying to shake it all up, I think all we really need to do for the election process is to secure our current means of carrying out an election, to require identification, to require that you prove citizenship. And I know I'll catch a lot of flack. I know I'm going to have people say, oh, well, that's racist, or you know, that's voter suppression. How? You need an ID to buy tobacco. You need an ID to drive. You need an ID to buy alcohol. You need some form of identification to almost do anything in the United States. And to say that somehow it's racist for people to require an ID to vote is an ignorant statement, because that implies that people of different races are incapable of getting an ID. So who's the racist? The person who thinks that all demographics are more than capable of getting their ID and operating just like the rest of us citizens do, or the person who thinks that they're incapable of doing it because of their skin color or their ethnicity? I would say it's that person who thinks that they're incapable of having an ID and therefore it's voter suppression. The person that holds that opinion, they are in fact a racist or a bigot, or they're just ignorant and they don't have a clue, and they speak on things that they haven't done any study or research into. Regardless, we need to secure our election process. We need to require identification. We need to ensure that it is fair. So if we're talking about observers being able to view the poll and view the counting, I mean, it's a legal obligation in most states, and yet it wasn't allowed. Votes need to be in on time. If we're going to do mail-in voting, if we're going to make this our new way of carrying out the vote, then we need better security there. Whether it be providing notarized signatures and then holding that notary accountable for not verifying identity before allowing that vote to be processed or sent, before they notarize the signature. Some extra step needs to be put in place to secure mail-in votes, because this is new. And just like anything else, when something new gets added in, when you start shaking it up and changing the rules, we need to revamp the security measures in place to ensure that it's not being taken advantage of. Now, it looks like Trump may lose, but he also still stands a chance to win. There are many legal arguments that some seem to hold some weight. that remains to be seen. We'll see how that plays out. But even if Biden becomes the president, we still need to shore up our election process. Because if we don't, then no American is being rightfully represented in all future elections. So if you're a Biden supporter, you're going to want the election process to be secured and fixed before we go into the 2024 election. Especially if some new candidate comes along that is in the media's favor more so than Biden. Because or Kamala Harris, because who knows? Biden doesn't look like he's going to make it 4 years. He's probably going to be in a home. But this whole thing needs to be shored up. We need to secure the election process. We need to maintain election integrity for all Americans. Doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, Green Party, Libertarian, Independent, makes no difference. Because if the election process is rigged, if there's no security measures put in place, if there's no way to maintain the sanctity of our elections, then it's just going to be manipulated as we move forward. And we will never have a true and honest election ever again. So let's not try to reinvent the wheel. Let's just shore up what we have and move forward. Anyways, I'm Alex with LWS. Please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and we'll see you next time.